The first time I realized something was wrong, I was halfway through a video call with a billion-dollar client pitching a cybersecurity package when the screen froze. Not a harmless hiccup. No, this was the type of glitch that makes your stomach drop. The frozen frame was Mel Blink, mouth open, looking like a stunned goldfish. My client bailed after the third interruption. I hadn't just lost a pitch, I lost a $50,000 contract because my internet decided to take a nap in the middle of a deal I'd been working on for months. I stormed into the living room, router in hand, already muttering technical curses, when I saw my download monitor spiking like a heart attack chart. Someone or something was bleeding my bandwidth dry, and that's when I saw it. Multiple unfamiliar devices connected to my network, all of them traced back to the same source, the roof, my roof. That was the moment I whispered the words that would spark the war. What in the freshly microwaved hell is going on up there? I live in a quiet, too clean for its own good HOA community, where everyone waves fake smile hellos and files real complaints behind your back. I knew the kind of people I was dealing with: clipboard warriors, anonymous note, and the kind of woman who thinks petunias are a personality trait. But even in a place where people measure lawn height with a ruler, I wasn't prepared for what I found on my own rooftop. It wasn't just a device or two. There were 3 large, professionally installed Wi-Fi repeaters bolted into my roof tiles, humming happily, blinking away, siphoning off my hard-earned high-speed internet like greedy little goblins. I nearly fell off the ladder at first. I thought maybe they were some sort of utility installation, a city program, maybe a shared community project, but no one had told me anything. No signs, no permissions, not even a passive aggressive flyer stuck in my door with bad clip art, just unauthorized tech hanging out above my living space like it paid rent. I grabbed my phone, took pictures, recorded video, and immediately marched down to the HOA office, ready to cause a scene worthy of a reality show reunion episode. Karen Davenport, the queen of the HOA, was seated behind the desk like she was presiding over a courtroom. Instead of a desk with expired peppermints in a bowl, she was wearing a pastel cardigan, and that look people get when they think they're in control of a situation. I stormed in, phone in hand, and before I could even speak, she smiled with the serenity of someone who had no idea tsunami was coming, and said, yes, Mr. Eli, we were meaning to let you know about the new community connectivity program we've installed. Wi-Fi boosters on key rooftops in the neighborhood. You've been selected as one of our central hubs, selected as if I'd won a sweepstakes. I asked when I had agreed to this, because last I checked my roof was not available for public lease. Karen, cool as a cucumber in winter, slid a piece of paper across the table like it was an ancient contract. I looked it was a general notice printed on standard paper, dated 3 months ago, and never delivered. It hadn't even been mailed. It had been posted to the community bulletin board, which I later found out was a dusty corkboard behind the HOA building next to the dumpster. According to Karen, the lack of response implied consent. When I pointed out that this logic was somewhere between laughable and legally insane, she chuckled and said, "Oh, Eli, you're such a tech guy, you'll be fine." That's when I knew 2 things. 1, Karen had no idea what I actually did for a living, and 2, I was about to become her worst nightmare. See, what Karen didn't know was that I wasn't just some neighborhood IT nerd. I used to design classified network security protocols for government contractors. These days, I consult for companies that pay more for a single firewall than she probably makes in a year. I monitor digital breaches for fun. I'm the guy companies call when someone halfway across the world is trying to hack their entire infrastructure through a printer port, and this woman decided to piggyback her HOA's Wi-Fi repeater system through my personal network like it was some kind of open buffet. I walked out of that office without saying another word, not because I was done, but because I was Just getting started, the first step was surveillance. I needed to understand just how bad the breach was. I traced every MAC address connected to my network, mapped the bandwidth use over time, and built a detailed report. What I found made my jaw drop. Over a dozen households were siphoning off my signal, streaming video, gaming, uploading ridiculous amounts of data. I even found someone mining crypto on my network. The entire eastern side of the neighborhood was essentially using my house as the central data node for their digital freeloading, and the cherry on top, they'd wired the repeaters directly into my power line. They were stealing electricity too. I stared at the data, then looked out the window at the calm, sun-drenched suburb and started to laugh. A slow, disbelieving, incredulous laugh that turned into something manic. These people really had no idea. They thought I was going to unplug the cables and call it a day. They thought I was going to grumble, maybe file a complaint, and wait 6 months for someone to look into it. But I wasn't going to do any of that. I was going to hit them where it hurt most, in their wallets, in their TikTok connections, and in their HOA approved sense of order. They wanted bandwidth. They were about to pay for every byte. And when I say pay, I don't mean metaphorically. I fired up my laptop, cracked my knuckles, and began writing what would become the most beautifully passive-aggressive splash page in digital history. It would look official. It would seem like a standard provider update, and once they clicked agree, they would essentially be signing into a system that tracked, billed, and throttled every kilobyte they consumed. But that was just phase one. This wasn't just about getting even. This was going to be fun. The first thing I did after setting the bait was given name: Operation Bandwidth Clampdown. It felt appropriately petty, ominous, and just techie enough to sound like something from a spy movie. I wasn't just going to cut off their Wi-Fi. I was going to charge them for it. After all, if they insisted on using my roof for their signal, then why not treat it like a premium service? But to make it work, I had to be surgical. One false step, and they'd notice something was off. Karen would storm back into my life with another nonsense legal threat, and the HOA would circle the wagons. No, this had to be subtle. At least at first, I began by building a fake splash page that looked like a genuine provider agreement update. It had the right colors, the right fonts, even a little fake logo I whipped up in Photoshop called Sky Fiber Enhanced. It was triggered the moment someone connected to the repeater signal. To the unsuspecting residents using the free Wi-Fi, it just looked like a routine policy update, something no one ever reads, except this one contained a clause, small, buried deep, that said users agree to pay 27 cents per megabyte consumed after 50 megabytes per day. And since I had access to the repeater traffic, I could track everything, every video streamed, every download, every ridiculous data draining TikTok marathon. It worked faster than I expected. Within the first 24 hours, the page had already logged 10 separate acknowledgement. I had names, I had IP addresses, I had data. More importantly, I had digital consent. I set up automatic invoices, each one sent from a freshly registered business email for my shell company data link utility services. It sounded just professional enough to sound legit, and just vague enough to avoid suspicion. The bills weren't enormous, yet the first wave of invoices went out the next day. $50 here, 100 there, enough to sting, but not enough to cause immediate rebellion. And just to sprinkle in some chaos, I sent one directly to the HOA treasurer, Mr. Harold Tompkins, for a clean $18,642. He paid it without question. The real comedy began when Karen herself received an invoice for $2,129 and marched back into the HOA office demanding answers. Except this time she wasn't angry at me. She was angry at the new provider. She thought the HOA had signed up for some shady service without telling her. I watched the whole meltdown unfold via hidden repeater cam I had rigged up for monitoring. Karen waving the invoice in the air like it was a bomb threat herald, defending himself with vague mutterings. About vendor trials, it was digital. Theater and I had front row seat, but just as I was getting comfortable in my villainous little throne, the HLA struck, back in their classic, predictable way. Paper citations, I woke up one morning to find 3 letters taped to my door. One was for unauthorized rooftop equipment, the second for non-compliant electrical, routing the third, and my personal favorite was for public endangerment through unstable antenna deployment, which was hilarious considering they were the ones who installed the antennas. In the first place, it was petty, it was ridiculous, and it only fueled me more. Rather than respond directly, I decided to escalate quietly. I started digging into HOA regulations, the bylaws, the power use agreements, the digital rights clauses. You'd be amazed how vague and outdated most HOA tech policies are. They were written in a time when the biggest digital threat was someone stealing cable with a wire hanger. The rules were so laughably out off that I realized I could practically write my own interpretation, and no one would understand it enough to fight me on it. That's when fate handed me the perfect wild card. MS Penelope Baxter, she lived 2 doors down, rarely spoke, always wore oversized gardening hats, and was generally assumed to be a harmless retiree. Turns out she was anything but. She knocked on my door one evening, holding a glass of lemonade, and said, "I saw what they did to your roof. They did the same thing to mine back in the day, but they didn't know I used to work for the FCC." I nearly dropped my drink. Penelope wasn't just a bored retiree. She was a retired federal compliance officer who had spent 30 years auditing illegal frequency use and unauthorized equipment installations. And when I showed her pictures of the repeaters and explained what they'd done, her face went cold. She muttered something about unlicensed hardware code violations and jail time, and then asked if I had more detailed specs. I invited her in, and within 10 minutes we were reviewing repeater logs, transmission reports, and energy consumption graphs like 2 hackers plotting a heist. She was loving every second of it, and I was loving having a surprise ally with the legal teeth to bite. But it didn't stop there. With her help, we discovered something even more damning. The repeaters weren't just using my internet, they were tapping into my electrical grid. The installation had been done by one of the HOAs preferred contractors who had conveniently spliced into my line to save costs. That meant I was footing the electric bill for every bit of traffic that passed through their system, all those hours of streaming, all those late night gaming sessions, every gigabyte pulled was burning my kilowatt. So I decided to play a little prank. I built a program that injected a 6-minute reset loop into the repeater's firmware. Every 6 minutes, the signal would drop, reboot, and log the event. It created chaos. Kids were screaming at Fortnite. Parents couldn't stream their shows. Smart devices started acting possessed. The best part, every time it rebooted, it played a short audio file. I embedded into the reset cycle a robotic voice that said, "Network interruption, please contact your provider." People were furious. Karen sent out a community-wide email calling it a cyber attack and blaming unnamed hackers. She ordered the HOA to investigate the provider while I sat comfortably on my couch watching the chaos play out across neighborhood forums and group chat. I even joined a few of them anonymously just to stir the pot. One guy thought it was a government test. Another blamed solar flares. My favorite was someone who said it was divine punishment for the HOA's behavior. I couldn't disagree, and just when I thought things couldn't get funnier, the HOA scheduled an emergency closed-door meeting to resolve the provider issue. I wasn't invited, obviously, but that didn't stop me. I used one of the repeaters as a Trojan horse, connecting into their private call and broadcasting it live to a closed Facebook group called HLA Horrors, which had more than a few disgruntled members. The reactions were priceless. Karen yelling about digital Terrorism Herald panicking about the invoices and Penelope watching beside me, sipping her lemonade and saying they really don't know who they're dealing with. They really didn't, but they were about to find out. The hoe retaliated like a toddler with a crayon, messy, dramatic, and completely missing the point. A week after the great bandwidth blackout began, I found a bright orange notice nailed to my front door. It claimed I had made unauthorized roof modifications and had exactly 7 days to restore the structure to community standard condition. What did that even mean? Was I supposed to uninstall their illegally installed repeaters and pretend none of this happened? Because that wasn't happening. 2 more citations arrived the next day, this time for suspicious wiring visible from the sidewalk and an alleged violation of aesthetic uniformity standards. Apparently, my Ethernet cable, barely visible along the edge of the wall, had somehow offended the architectural soul of the neighborhood. I stood in my driveway holding a stack of citations and laughed. These people had no clue that the more they pushed, the more creative I was going to get. While Karen and the HOA board played amateur hour power games, I continued gathering evidence. I had photos, power usage graphs, surveillance screenshots, and now documented retaliation. But I wasn't just playing defense anymore. I was building towards something much bigger. That's when I noticed something odd on my energy monitoring dashboard. My smart system tracks every watt of electricity used in my home, but the data showed a spike consistent daily and unexplained. After some digging and a few long hours tracing wires and flipping breakers, I found the culprit. The repeaters weren't just leeching off my Wi-Fi. They were hardwired into my main power line, not even through a secondary outlet or a piggyback circuit. No, this was a clean, deliberate splice into my breaker panel, routed through a junction box that had been sealed and painted to blend in with the rest of the exterior. A contractor didn't just cut corners, they committed theft. This wasn't a prank anymore. This was straight up illegal, and I had the proof. With Penelope's guidance, I compiled everything into a formal FCC complaint and submitted it through the proper channels. But bureaucracy takes time, and I wasn't about to wait for paperwork while Karen continued pretending she was queen of the cul-de-sac. So I moved to phase 2, the power bounce trap. It was elegant, a simple script connected to my smart home hub that monitored load variant whenever the load spiked beyond a certain threshold. Say, during primetime movie hours, the system would cut power to the affected circuit for 10 seconds, then restore it just enough to crash streaming devices, interrupt downloads, and confuse anyone watching, and it wouldn't trigger the breaker, so no one would know what was causing it. The best part, it only affected the circuit powering the repeaters. My house stayed untouched. Their Wi-Fi became a living nightmare of buffering, reconnecting, and mysterious outages. Naturally, it didn't take long for the chaos to escalate. Neighborhood group chats exploded with questions. Was there a wiring issue? Had squirrels chewed through something? One guy started a conspiracy theory about electromagnetic pulses. Karen, ever the beacon of misdirection, issued a community alert blaming unstable provider infrastructure and hinted at switching vendors. She even threatened legal action against the unnamed contractor she thought was behind the dropouts. I considered sending her an anonymous invoice just for the irony, but I held back barely. Then came the emergency HOA board meeting. They tried to keep it private, of course, scheduled at night, held in the community center with locked doors and a members-only sign taped up in cheap font. But they forgot one tiny detail: their repeaters still connected to my custom network, and that meant I had access to everything. I watched the entire meeting through a laptop in my kitchen while eating popcorn like it was a Netflix binge. The drama was better than any scripted show I'd ever seen. Karen yelling about unstable service, Harold panicking over rising costs, another board member suggesting they tear the whole system Down before someone got sued at one point. Karen mentioned my name, called me digitally hostile, and then suggested that I might be trying to sabotage the community. That was the moment I decided to record the feed and stream it live to a few trusted residents who had started asking questions. The reaction was instantaneous. Turns out I wasn't the only one who had beef with the HOA. The stream spread faster than I expected. Within an hour, over 50 people had tuned in. Some watched silently, others began messaging me through a burner email I'd created for the occasion, sharing their own stories, late fees for bogus charges, citations for things like wind chimes, forced lawn color changes. One person even got fined for a bird bath being too whimsical. The HOA wasn't just incompetent, they were a full-blown regime hiding behind bad stationery. The fallout from the leak came fast. The next day, a small but growing group of residents confronted Karen during one of her self-appointed morning walkthroughs. Someone printed a screenshot of her accusing me of sabotage and taped it to the community bulletin board, the same one she had used to announce the original repeater installation. Karen tried to deflect, but it was too late. The cracks were showing. People were asking questions she couldn't answer. Why were the repeaters installed without resident consent? Why was Eli paying the electric bill? Why were there invoices from a company no one had approved? And most importantly, why was there Wi-Fi suddenly garbage instead of responding with logic or grace? Karen doubled down. She issued another round of fines, this time for community defamation and dissemination of private HOA materials. She even implied in a follow-up letter that I might be guilty of cybercrimes. That's when I sent her a formal cease and desist notice on legal letterhead from a real attorney friend who owed me a favor. The letter outlined her overreach, the violations of my property rights, and made it very clear that any further action on her part would result in a defamation suit and possible criminal proceedings. Penelope co-signed it. So did another neighbor who happened to be a retired municipal judge. The silence that followed was glorious, but the cherry on top didn't come from me. It came from Harold, the HOA treasurer, who suddenly realized he'd been paying invoices from Data Link utility services without vetting them. He panicked, went through every bill for the last 6 months, found more than a few questionable charges, not just mine, but others Karen had authorized for her pet projects. When confronted during a follow-up meeting, she accused him of financial negligence. He fired back with a printed spreadsheet and stormed out of the room. By the time the dust settled, Harold had resigned too. Board members had abstained from further votes, and Karen was left sitting at the head of a rapidly collapsing empire. I knew then the end was near, but I wasn't done. I was just getting started. It was one thing to watch the HOA unravel from a distance, but it was something else entirely to stand in the middle of the chaos you caused and still be the only person who looked like they had a plan. The moment Harold resigned to power, vacuum opened up that Karen scrambled to fill, but her grip was slipping. The other board members, now terrified of legal trouble, became indecisive and quiet. Emails went unanswered, citations stopped arriving, meetings were postponed indefinitely. The HOA had gone from overbearing to paralyzed, and I wasn't about to let them regroup. With Penelope's help, I filed a formal request for immediate HOA transparency and accountability audit. These were obscure clauses buried deep in the bylaws, the kind of rules no one ever reads, but they were real and legally enforceable. They forced the HOA to disclose all spending decisions and communications over the past fiscal year. I made sure to send the request as a certified letter with a digital backup sent to every resident's inbox. Suddenly, Karen wasn't just facing a few grumbling neighbors. She was staring down a small army, all legally armed and hungry for answers. But while that battle brewed in slow motion, I turned my attention to something far more satisfying: the great disconnection. The repeaters still sat up, On my roof, humming along miserably, resetting every 6 minutes and feeding a stream of automated fake service. Messages I decided it was time to take them down, but not before one final act. Using the same system I'd used to monitor the traffic, I injected a firmware update that transformed the repeaters into decoys instead of distributing internet access. They now broadcast a Wi-Fi signal named Karen, stole bandwidth anyone who tried to connect was redirected to a landing page that simply said, "Ask the HOA why your Wi-Fi is trash." The reaction was immediate. People started snapping photos and posting them on the neighborhood message board. Screenshots circulated with captions like "Savage Legend" and "Not all heroes wear capes." Someone even made a meme of Karen's face next to a router with flames behind it. The HO's reputation, already hanging by a thread, collapsed overnight. Even the most compliant residents, the ones who once sent polite emails about hedge trimming, started questioning everything. I didn't even have to do anything anymore. The system I'd built was doing all the work for me. All I had to do was sit back and enjoy the fallout, but I was entirely heartless with the chaos reaching a boiling point. I decided to offer a solution on my terms. I drafted a proposal and presented it to the residents directly, bypassing the HOA. Entirely, the plan was simple. I would assume full responsibility for managing neighborhood connectivity, including high-speed internet infrastructure, maintenance, and network security. In return, I would charge a modest monthly fee directly billed to users who opted in. No forced participation, no hidden fees. Total transparency. The response was overwhelming. Within 2 days, more than half the residents had signed up. They trusted me more than they trusted the HOA, and I couldn't blame them. Karen, of course, lost her mind. She tried to block the proposal, claiming I was illegally forming a communications monopoly. She even called the city and tried to report me as an unlicensed service provider, but she hit a wall because, thanks to Penelope's connections and some quick paperwork, Data Link Utility Services was now an officially registered local vendor. I had licenses, insurance, and more legal documentation than Karen had. Home decor awards. I wasn't just in the clear, I was bulletproof. And just to put a cherry on top, I filed for construction permit to install a ham radio tower on my property. Legally, it fell within zoning regulations. Technically, it served a valid communication purpose, but practically it was a massive eyesore and stood tall enough to block the sun from Karen's prized flower beds for 2 solid hours each afternoon. The permit went through without a hitch. When the foundation was poured and the first segment of the tower went up, Karen stood in her driveway, arms crossed, jaw clenched, powerless. It was a beautiful thing. Around the same time the news picked up the story, it started small, a quirky local segment about neighborhood drama and the man who turned the tables on his HOA, but the angle caught on soon. I was getting interview requests from national outlets, tech blogs, even a digital rights advocacy group that wanted to feature me in a panel discussion. I turned most of them down, but the attention served a purpose. It made sure the HOA couldn't retaliate. Quietly, any move they made now would be in the spotlight, but the real victory came during the next community meeting, which for the first time was open to all residents and broadcast via a live video link. Karen tried to reclaim control, standing at the podium and giving a speech about order, integrity, and the importance of respecting the chain of command. No one clapped when she tried to call for a vote to censure me for cyber aggression. Penelope interrupted with a motion to remove Karen from the board. Entirely, the vote wasn't even close. Karen lost her position, her control, and whatever illusion she had that people still took her seriously. Penelope was elected interim president, and the first thing she did was cancel all pending citations, open the HOA's books for public review, and dissolve the community connectivity initiative that started This whole mess in its place, she proposed a cooperative infrastructure. Agreement 1 where residents could vote on major tech upgrades approved. Contractors and even pitch neighborhood improvement ideas directly. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest at first. Time and years people felt like they had a say in their own neighborhood. As for the repeaters, I removed them that weekend. I filmed the whole thing me on the roof, unscrewing the boxes, yanking the cables and dropping them into a trash bin with a dramatic thunk. The video made the round, of course, more memes, more applause. One neighbor brought me a pie, another offered to pay my internet bill for a month. I declined, but appreciated the sentiment. By the end of the month, my network consulting service had over 30 clients, all within a 5 block radius. The Ham Tower stood proudly in the yard, now doubling as a weather monitoring station. An occasional bird perch. Karen, meanwhile, had gone completely silent. Rumor had it she was planning to move. Apparently the new Wi-Fi network wouldn't connect in her house anymore, and she was too proud to ask me for help. So I went on with my life, enjoying the peace I created, the neighborhood I'd reshaped, and the knowledge that I'd turned a petty power grab into a full-scale neighborhood revolution. I didn't set out to be a hero, but if messing with the wrong nerd meant they finally learned what real power looked like, then maybe I'd earned the title. You'd think after all that the saga would have ended. The tyrant dethroned, the repeaters removed, the HOA humbled, and the neighborhood returned to something resembling peace. But life has a funny way of throwing in one last twist just to make sure you're paying attention. For me, it came in the form of a registered letter dropped on my doorstep 3 weeks after Karen's fall from HOA grace. It was crisp, professional, and stamped with the official logo of a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a formal complaint filed by none other than Karen Davenport herself. She was accusing me of malicious interference with community operations, public humiliation, data fraud, and this part really made me laugh. Cyber piracy, yes. According to Karen, I had committed acts of piracy from the comfort of my own home, apparently flying a digital Jolly Roger while sipping coffee and managing a neighborhood Wi-Fi network. I could have dismissed it outright. The claims were paper-thin, full of speculation and buzzwords pulled from a late-night crime show, but I wasn't about to ignore it. I had spent months turning this HOA disaster into a calculated masterpiece, and I wasn't about to let the closing chapter fizzle out with some empty lawsuit. So I responded, not with anger, not with counter-accusations, but with paperwork, cold, precise, bulletproof paperwork. My lawyer, bless him, prepared a 26-page response that dismantled every single one of Karen's claims attached to. It was a counterclaim of my own, detailing the unauthorized installation of commercial equipment on private property, energy theft, property code violations, and the retaliatory conduct Karen had orchestrated through her position in the HOA. It wasn't just a legal reply, it was a roadmap to her downfall, lined with receipts, digital logs, time-stamped images, and signed resident affidavit. Karen's lawyer must have taken one look at it and realized they were sitting on a live grenade, because the case never made it to court. 2 weeks later, I received another letter, this one apologetic. Karen was dropping her complaint, citing personal stress and mental fatigue. Translation: she lost, and she knew it. Word spread quickly, and the victory wasn't just mine. The entire neighborhood felt it. The silence from Karen's end grew louder. With each passing day, she stopped walking the block, stopped waving at passing cars. Or once perfectly manicured yard turned slightly wild, and there were whispers about a for sale sign coming soon. I didn't gloat, okay, maybe a little, but mostly I enjoyed the sense of closure she had tried to take something from me, my network, my peace, my power, and I had taken it all back without breaking a single law in a world full of petty control freaks and entitled bureaucrats. That felt like a rare kind of justice. The HOA, now led by Penelope and a newly elected board went through a complete reboot. The new leadership implemented changes that actually made sense: transparent finances, open forums, rotating leadership roles, and most importantly, a ban on any new technological installations without full community approval and homeowner consent. People started caring about their neighborhood again, not out of fear of citations, but because they finally felt heard and because no one wanted to be the next Karen. Penelope, meanwhile, had taken to calling me her digital watchdog. She joked that I should be getting a monthly stipend for cybersecurity services, and honestly, she wasn't wrong. The infrastructure I built for my consulting business became the neighborhood's unofficial backbone. Secure, stable, and monitored with care, not surveillance. Residents now had access to fast internet with clear billing, privacy guarantees, and zero interference from any HOA nonsense. A few even approached me with interest in expanding the model to nearby neighborhood. I told them I'd think about it. After all, every hero needs a day off. But just when I thought the dust had finally settled, one last surprise came. Knocking literally late one evening, I heard a soft knock at the door. I opened it to find a delivery guy holding a small nondescript box, no return address, just my name printed cleanly on the label. I took it inside, opened it carefully, and laughed out loud when I saw what was inside. It was a miniature router trophy, custom engraved with the words King of Bandwidth Neighborhood Edition. No note, no sender, just the trophy gleaming under my kitchen light, like a reward for surviving the weirdest suburban war in history. I place it on my shelf right next to the books on cybersecurity and the framed photo of my dog wearing sunglasses. It felt right, fitting, because the truth was this wasn't just a story about Wi-Fi or power, theft or HOA madness. It was about boundaries, about standing up when someone thinks they can bulldoze through your rights just because they've got a clipboard and a title. It was about knowing your worth and having the skill and the patience to outmaneuver people who think they can get away with anything just because they've always gotten away with everything. In the weeks that followed, I made peace with the idea that things would never fully go back to how they were before, but in some ways, they were better. My neighbors respected me now, not just as the guy who fixed the internet, but as someone who stood up to a system that had gone unchecked for too long. People stopped whispering and started waving. Even the passive aggressive couple down the street offered me a cup of coffee one morning. That's when you know you've won. And Karen, true to the rumors, she moved out quietly one Saturday morning. A moving truck showed up just after sunrise. She didn't say goodbye to anyone, just packed her pastel furniture, loaded her garden statues, and disappeared. Her house sold within a week, and the new owners turned out to be a retired IT professor and his daughter who ran an online gaming community. They moved and saw the ham tower in my yard and brought over a welcome cake shaped like a computer mouse. I told them they were going to fit in just fine. Life settled into a new rhythm, quieter, calmer. But every time I walked by the spot where the repeaters used to sit, I smiled, because I knew the signal that one stole from me had become the very tool I used to take everything back. I didn't have to yell. I didn't have to stoop. I just had to be smarter. And I was. So if you're ever in a neighborhood where the HOA thinks it owns your roof, your power, your privacy, remember my story, and remember that sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a steady connection, a few lines of code, and a well-timed reboot. Oh, and a trophy. Definitely don't forget the trophy.